You didn't buy that apartment because it was the only one available. That's the sentence. Not the kindest one. Not the smartest one. Not the one a reasonable person says to their neighbor on a Tuesday morning in February when the hallway is cold and they're still in last night's sweatshirt, and they haven't even had coffee yet. But it was the true one. And Sofia Reyes had spent the last 4 months saying every sentence except the true ones, and she was tired. She was standing in her doorway, barefoot. The floor was cold through her socks. She'd lost the left one somewhere between the bathroom and the kitchen. And she had meant to walk to the elevator, pick up her package from the lobby, come back, make coffee, do her Tuesday like a normal person. Instead, she was here, looking at Morgan Elliott, who had clearly been doing the opposite, leaving for the day, perfectly assembled in her charcoal coat, her dark hair pulled back in the specific way she wore it when she had early meetings, her travel mug already in hand, her keys already turned toward the elevator, and who had pulled up short when Sofia's door opened. They looked at each other for a beat, and then, before Sofia's brain had a chance to intercept it, her mouth did the thing mouths do when they've been holding something too long. You didn't buy that apartment because it was the only one available. Morgan didn't move. She was very good at that, at stillness, at being exactly as composed as the situation required. Sofia had learned that about her over the last 4 months. The composure wasn't coldness. It was something else. Something closer to the silence before a very careful answer. No, Morgan said after a moment. I didn't. The elevator chimed. Its doors opened, unhelpful and impartial. Morgan looked at Sofia for one more second, and it was not a short second. It was the kind that takes up more space than its neighbors. And then she stepped inside. The doors closed. Sofia stood in the hallway and didn't move until she heard the elevator's hum fade toward the lobby. She stood there for a while after that, too. Then she went back inside her apartment, stood in the kitchen, put both hands flat on the counter, and said to Gerald the basil plant, "Well," Gerald had no notes. "If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Here's what you need to know before any of this makes sense. Before February. Before the hallway. Before the night on the balcony that neither of them will talk about even now, even to the people who ask. Before the book with the note inside that is currently sitting on Sofia's kitchen table with a corner folded at page 12, because she can't read past it without having to stop and breathe. Before all of it. You need to know that Sofia Reyes was fine. Not fine the way people are fine when they're not fine and they've given up explaining it. Fine the way a person is fine when they've worked hard to build a life that fits them, that is genuinely and specifically theirs, and who looks at it on an average Tuesday morning and thinks, yes, this is what I wanted. She had her apartment. 834 square feet on the 7th floor of the Meridian, a building on North Clark Street in Chicago that had old bones and a temperamental radiator and an elevator that made a sound like a startled cat every time it stopped at the 4th floor. She'd been there 5 years. She knew the smell of the hallway in July and the way the light came through her bedroom window at 6 a.m. in late spring. She knew which neighbors left their shoes outside the door and which ones were loud on Saturday nights, and which one, Mrs. Kowalski, 7C, would occasionally leave homemade cookies on the hallway bench for no reason and without any note. She knew the building. She belonged to it. Her work was hers too. Freelance copywriting, which she knew sounded like something a person did when they were between other things, but was, for Sofia, a genuine and deliberate choice. She had a roster of clients she'd built over 7 years. Tech companies, a couple of nonprofits, a small publishing house that paid her in books as often as in money, and with whom she had long ago made her peace. She worked from her kitchen table. She took meetings on her laptop. She went to the lakefront on Tuesday afternoons when the weather allowed it, and on bad weather Tuesdays she went to the coffee place on Diversey that played jazz and had outlets near every table. It was a good life. It was the right size. She wasn't lonely. She had Jade, her best friend since college, who lived in Wicker Park and had opinions about everything and was the kind of person who could make standing in line at the DMV feel like a decent time. She had her work. She had Gerald and 2 other plants whose names she hadn't committed to yet. And then, on a Wednesday in October, someone moved into 7B. Go back with us to the beginning. Or, not quite the beginning. Go back to October, 4 months before the hallway, 4 months before the sentence that couldn't be taken back, because to understand that Tuesday morning in February, you have to understand what October did. And what October did was simple and irreversible. It put them in the same hallway, at the same time, with 6 months left on a clock neither of them knew was running. The building had a way of knowing things before the people in it did. Sophia noticed it first through small signs. The furniture delivery van that blocked the street for most of a Wednesday morning. The sound of boxes being moved, the low hum of someone directing movers with the kind of quiet efficiency that said they'd done this before and had opinions about it. The new smell in the hallway. Something clean. A little like cedar. Not unpleasant. She was on her way out when she first saw her. Not properly. Not stopped. Introduced. Exchanged names. Just a glance. The way you glance at a new neighbor while pretending to look at your phone. A woman in a white shirt, with her sleeves rolled to the elbows, standing in the doorway of 7B with a tablet in her hand, and a mover waiting for her to decide where the couch went. The woman looked up. Their eyes met for approximately 1 second. Sophia looked back at her phone and kept walking. She did not think about it on the elevator down. She barely thought about it in the lobby. She was already thinking about the brief she needed to finish by Friday, the call with the publishing house at 3 p.m., the question of whether Gerald needed to be repotted. She thought about the woman in the white shirt a little bit on the walk back from the coffee place. She put it away. The formal introduction happened 2 days later, in the way all hallway introductions happen. At the mailboxes, slightly awkward, both people holding things and pretending the encounter is spontaneous. Sophia Reyes, Sophia said, because she'd always believed in just saying the thing. 7A. Morgan Elliott, the woman said. 7B. A pause. I know you, actually. Sophia had already figured this out by the second syllable of the name. Because once you heard it, the face sorted itself into memory, and memory delivered. A conference room on the 14th floor of a building on Michigan Avenue, 6 months ago. A campaign pitch for a financial firm's rebrand. 3 weeks of contract work that had paid well and gone smoothly and ended without ceremony. She'd had 2 real interactions with Morgan Elliott during those 3 weeks. One was a brief hallway conversation about a document she'd been sent the wrong version of. The other was longer. A Friday afternoon when half the office had already emptied out, and they'd ended up in the kitchen at the same time and talked for almost 40 minutes about nothing in particular. The city, the winter coming, a book that had turned up on both their radars. Sophia had thought about that conversation on the L home. She had not thought of it again, or she had occasionally, in the way you think about a good meal from months ago, as a small, pleasant thing that belonged to a finished day. From Thornfield, Sophia said. Yes. Morgan nodded. Something in her expression was careful in a way that suggested she'd prepared for this moment. Small world. The Meridian is a big building, Sophia said. That's a lot of apartments to happen to end up in. Morgan almost smiled. It is. They collected their mail. They went back to their respective doors. That was October. Here is who Morgan Elliott was, as Sophia understood her then and would come to understand her more fully later. She was 38, the CEO of Thornfield Capital, which managed a substantial portfolio of mid-size companies across the Midwest and had, in the last 3 years under Morgan's leadership, grown considerably and aggressively, and with a precision that had earned her a profile in 2 business publications and a reputation that preceded her into every room. She had the kind of professional presence that made people sit slightly straighter without knowing why. She was not loud. She did not need to be. Her intelligence was the kind that came out in the quality of her questions, rather than the volume of her answers, and people who had met her once tended to remember exactly what she'd said. She had lived, before the Meridian, in a penthouse in the Gold Coast. This was a fact Sophia learned later from Jade, who had done the research with the comfortable absence of shame that characterized all of Jade's research. She sold it, Jade reported, on a Saturday in November, perched on Sophia's kitchen counter eating cereal. 8 months ago, moved into some corporate rental for a few weeks, and then, your building. She pointed at Sophia with the spoon. Adjacent apartment. Coincidence? Stop. I'm just saying. You've been just saying for 3 weeks. Because you won't say anything. Jade gestured broadly at the wall shared with 7B. She's right there. You worked with her. She looks like that. I am not having this conversation. And she moved in next door specifically. She said it was the only unit available. Jade gave Sophia a long, patient look. Baby, there are 47 units in this building. 6 are on the market right now. I checked. Sophia looked at the wall. I'm not saying anything, she said. I know, Jade said. That's what I'm saying. This is who Sophia was, as the person who knows her best would tell you. She was 34, and she had lived in Chicago for 9 years, and she had never entirely lost the quality of someone who was still, in small ways, figuring out what she was capable of. She was kind in the specific way that meant she noticed when people were struggling before they said so, and did something about it before they asked. She was funny in a way that surprised people, dry, precise, perfectly timed. And she was private in a way that sometimes looked like coldness until you understood it was actually just care. She didn't open herself to people quickly. When she did, it mattered. She had been in 2 serious relationships. One had ended badly and taught her something about herself. One had ended gently and taught her something about love. That it could exist and still not be enough. That the absence of a reason to leave was not the same as a reason to stay. She was not looking for anything. She was fine. She was fine. It started slowly, the way everything true does. The first month was nothing unusual. They were neighborly in the specific register of adult urban life. Brief hellos at the mailboxes, the occasional held elevator. Once a note slipped under the door that said, "Your Amazon box was left outside mine by mistake. M." Sophia had knocked. Morgan had opened. They had stood in the doorway for a minute while Sophia said thank you, and Morgan said it was no trouble. And then they had both gone back inside, and that was that. Nothing unusual. 2 professionals sharing a hallway and handling it like professionals. Except Sophia started to notice things. Small things. The kind that accumulate without announcing themselves. Morgan worked late. Very late. Sophia knew this because she kept odd hours herself, a freelancer's privilege or curse, depending on the week. And she would sometimes be at her kitchen table at midnight or later, and the light under the shared wall would be on. Not just on. Bright. The bright of someone fully at work, not someone watching television in the dark. She noticed the recycling. She and Morgan shared the recycling closet at the end of the hall, and Sophia had a habit of going last on recycling day to make sure everything was sorted correctly. She was not going to explain this. It was just her. And she began to notice the pattern in Morgan's contribution. Takeout containers. A lot of them. Every night, different restaurants. The efficient rotation of someone who was eating for fuel and not for pleasure. Coffee cups from the building's lobby machine at hours that were not reasonable for any reasonable person. She noticed once that Morgan got a package on a Tuesday morning that sat in the hallway for 3 days before she picked it up, which meant she hadn't been coming or going through the front door for 3 days, which meant she'd been working from her apartment for 72 consecutive hours without a visible break. Sophia thought about it. She thought, it's not my business. She thought, we don't know each other like that. She thought, she's fine. She's a CEO. They work hard. That's the job. She made her coffee and went to her kitchen table and opened her laptop and worked. The night it changed was a Thursday in mid-November. Sophia was reading. It was late, nearly 11, and the building was the specific quiet of a weeknight when everyone had given up on the day and gone to sleep. She had a cup of tea cooling on the side table, and a blanket, and the kind of loose, boneless contentment that comes from a good book, and no obligations until morning. She heard the sound through the wall. It was faint. The walls at the Meridian were not paper, and you had to be paying attention to hear through them. Sophia wasn't paying attention. But the sound was the kind that finds you anyway, a low, poorly suppressed sound of someone in genuine physical discomfort. Not dramatic, not loud, just real. She put her book down. She sat for a moment. It was nothing. People had bad nights. It wasn't her place. The sound came again. Sophia got up. She stood in her hallway for a minute with her arms crossed, having a quiet internal argument with herself. And then she went to her kitchen and filled a glass of water and put on her slippers. And then she walked to her front door, opened it, crossed the 3 feet of hallway between 7A and 7B, and knocked. Silence. Then, "I'm fine." "You don't sound fine," Sophia said to the door. A longer silence. Then the sound of someone moving toward the door, slowly, as if each step required a small decision. The door opened. Morgan Elliott looked terrible, not in the way that word is usually used. Not messy or diminished in any social sense. She looked terrible in the specific way of someone who had been running on empty for a very long time and had run out of the thing that was hiding it. Her face was pale and too tight around the jaw. She was still in work clothes, an actual blouse and trousers at 11 at night, but they were wrinkled in a way Sophia had never seen on her before. She was holding onto the door frame in a way that was not quite casual. "Food poisoning," Morgan said. Her voice was steady and slightly too controlled, which was how Sophia knew she was embarrassed. "I'm handling it." Sophia looked past her into the apartment. She'd never been inside. What she saw was a space that was still, 6 weeks after move-in, somewhere between a hotel room and a home. Boxes along one wall, still taped. A dining table with a single chair. On the kitchen counter, an empty takeout container, 2 mugs, a stack of papers that had spread themselves across the surface with the resigned exhaustion of something that had been there for a long time. "Do you have anything in your kitchen?" Sophia said. Morgan blinked. "What?" "Crackers, broth, ginger tea, anything." "I don't need—" "Morgan." Sophia said her name the way you say it when you want someone to stop the sentence they're about to say. "Do you have anything in your kitchen?" Morgan closed her eyes for a moment. "Probably not." "Okay," Sophia said. "Go sit down." She went back to her apartment. She was gone for maybe 12 minutes. She came back with crackers, a container of broth she put in a bag to heat up, ginger tea, and the spare throw blanket from her couch, because Morgan's living room had looked cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Morgan was sitting on the couch when Sophia came in. The single couch in the otherwise sparse living room turned toward the window. The city was out there, the particular gift of a 7th-floor apartment, the lights, the grid of it, the evidence that everything was still going without you. Sophia heated the broth in Morgan's near-empty kitchen without comment. She didn't ask about the boxes. She didn't ask about the chair. She brought everything to the table in front of the couch and went back to make the tea. "You don't have to do this," Morgan said, from the couch. "I know," Sophia said. She sat in the armchair across from Morgan while Morgan ate crackers and drank broth in small, careful sips, and neither of them said much. Sophia had brought her book. She read. Morgan ate. The city did its city thing outside the window. Somewhere around midnight, Morgan said quietly, "I went back to the office that afternoon, 6 months ago, the Friday in the kitchen." Sophia looked up from her book. "I saw you from the elevator. You were already in the lobby." A pause. I almost called down. Sophia looked at her. Morgan was looking at the window. Why didn't you? Sophia asked. Morgan didn't answer for a while. I couldn't think of a reason that sounded like a reason. They were quiet after that. Around 1, Morgan fell asleep sitting up, the broth container empty on the table. Sophia put the blanket over her. She took the dishes to the kitchen, washed them, left them to dry. She turned off the bright overhead light, left the small lamp on by the window. She let herself out. She stood in the hallway for a second before going back to 7A. She didn't examine what she was feeling. Not yet. The week after was different in ways she couldn't have quantified. It was small things. Morgan knocked on her door on Saturday afternoon to return the container. She was better, color back in her face, that quality of controlled composure restored. But there was something different in the way she stood in the doorway. Less of the professional surface, just a little less. Thank you, Morgan said. Genuinely, Sophia repeated. You're welcome. Something shifted in Morgan's expression that Sophia didn't have a word for yet. Your apartment smells like basil, Morgan said. Gerald. The plant. You named your basil plant Gerald. He's been through some things. He deserved a name. Morgan looked at her for a moment, and then she laughed. A real laugh. The kind that was too quick to be controlled. The kind that was over almost before it started. As if it had escaped before she decided to let it out. It was, Sophia thought, going back inside. A very good laugh. She thought about it more than was reasonable. The balcony happened by accident the following week. Sophia went out to water Gerald, who technically didn't need to be on the balcony in November, but who had developed a stubbornness about the specific quality of outdoor morning light that Sophia had decided not to fight. She was out there in her coat with her coffee, 7:30 in the morning, and she looked to the left, and Morgan was there too. On her half of the shared balcony, separated from Sophia's by a planter box that had been there when Sophia moved in, and had served, until this moment, no function at all. Morgan had coffee. She was looking at the lake, which you could just see from the 7th floor if the buildings across the street were cooperating. She was in a coat, but still clearly in the early stages of being dressed. No bag, no keys, not yet assembled for the day. Morning, Sophia said. Morning, Morgan said. They stood there on their respective sides of the planter box for a few minutes, and drank their coffee and looked at the strip of lake you could see, which was narrow, but which was still, unmistakably, the lake. I didn't know you could see it from here, Morgan said. Only in November. The leaves help. Morgan nodded slowly, as if filing this away. Sophia finished her coffee and went back inside. She was at her kitchen table for maybe 3 minutes before she caught herself smiling for no reason she was prepared to defend. After that, the balcony was a thing that happened. Not every day. Not with any stated agreement. But enough, 3 mornings a week, 4, sometimes 5, that the planter box began to feel less like a barrier and more like a table. They brought their coffee and their mornings out there. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. The city went about its business below them, and they went about theirs. And the space between them was 7:30 in the morning, and cold air and something that was, if you asked Sophia, just the two of them being neighbors. Just that. Just neighbors. She told herself that specifically every morning. Every single morning. December came in cold and direct, the way Chicago Decembers do, with no preamble and no apology. Sophia noticed that she was leaving her apartment later in the mornings. Not later enough to affect anything. Not dramatically later. Just, she had begun to find reasons to still be there at 7:15, 7:20, in a way that she had not before October. She might be finishing her coffee. She might be making a second cup. She might be checking something on her laptop that could have waited until she sat down to actually work. She did not examine this too closely. There are things you don't look at directly because you know that if you do, they will ask something of you. What she couldn't ignore was the quieter, more private evidence. The fact that she had begun to notice Morgan's voice in the hallway and feel something happen in her chest before she'd processed what she was hearing. The fact that she woke up one morning from a dream she couldn't remember the specifics of and lay still for a long moment with the clear, certain sense that Morgan had been in it. The fact that she caught herself, one Tuesday afternoon at the coffee place on Diversey, staring at nothing with her laptop open and untouched for 15 minutes. And when she traced the thought back to its origin, it went straight to the balcony that morning, and something Morgan had said. Nothing important. A small observation about the way the light was hitting the buildings across the street. And the way she'd said it. And the way Sophia had looked at her saying it, and she closed the thought. Firmly. She opened a client document and worked. The thing about December was that it brought with it a quality of closeness that Sophia hadn't fully anticipated. It was the cold. Partly. The balcony moved inside. There was a night, mid-December, when Morgan knocked and said she had too much takeout, which was not quite true, but was a sentence that worked. And Sophia came over with wine because she had opened a bottle already and wasn't going to finish it alone. And they ate at Morgan's table and talked for 3 hours. This was when Sophia started to understand what she was dealing with. Not romantically. She was still not quite ready to use that word, even in the privacy of her own thoughts. But she was starting to understand that Morgan Elliott, the one in the business profiles and the board meetings and the tailored coat, was not the only Morgan. Was maybe not even the main Morgan. The one who showed up at her table with wine and time was someone who laughed more than she probably had occasion to at work, who had opinions about novels and strong ones about the way cities handled winter, who could take a subject and hold it from 5 different angles and ask exactly the question that made you think. Who was, underneath the specific kind of competence that walked into rooms and changed their temperature, genuinely and privately uncertain about a handful of things she clearly didn't get to be uncertain about at work. "Do you miss the Gold Coast?" Sophia asked at some point in the evening. Morgan considered this with the care she gave most questions. "I miss certain things. The view, the quiet." A pause. "But I think I was disappearing there." Sophia waited. It's harder to disappear in a building like this. People know when your mail's been sitting for 3 days. Something at the edge of her mouth. When you're clearly not going outside. "You knew I noticed that?" "I assumed you'd notice. You're observant." She said it simply, as a fact, not a compliment. That was partly the point. Sophia looked at her. "Of what?" Morgan picked up her wine. Looked at it. "This building." They didn't talk about it after that. But the sentence sat between them with the weight of a door left open in a room you've been standing outside of for months. It was around this time that Jade, who had visited twice since October, sat down on Sophia's couch and said simply, "You're in trouble." "I'm not." "You mentioned her 4 times in 20 minutes. We're neighbors. It's natural. You told me what she thinks about the structural problems of third acts in fiction." Sophia opened her mouth. "Specifically," Jade said, "with examples." Sophia closed her mouth. Jade looked at her with great patience and great love. "Baby." "It's not," Sophia started. "I know you know," Jade said. "I'm not telling you something you don't know. I just need you to know that I know." Sophia looked at the wall between 7A and 7B for a moment. "She lives 12 feet away from me," she said. "She has a board of directors and a public profile and a life that I know. It would be complicated in ways that don't. I know. I'm not actually saying anything is..." "Sophia." Jade leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm just saying, I see it. and I think you should stop pretending you don't." Sophia didn't answer. She thought about it for the rest of the day, and into the night. And while she was standing in her kitchen at midnight making tea she didn't really want, and while she was lying in bed staring at the ceiling with the distinct sense of a person who has identified the exact shape of something she cannot put back where it was. She was not imagining it. That was the thing. She had tried, periodically, to run the version of events where it was just warmth, just proximity, just the natural result of two people spending mornings on a balcony in a winter city. She had tried that version, and it didn't hold. It didn't hold because of the Thursday. Morgan had been reading something on her laptop at the kitchen table. Sophia was there too, working on her own laptop, the way they'd started sometimes doing in the evenings. Just present in the same space. And Sophia had looked up for some reason, and found Morgan already looking at her. Not a glance. Not the quick redirect of someone who'd looked accidentally. A look. And Morgan held it for one steady second, before she looked back at her screen, and neither of them said anything. And the room was very quiet. It didn't hold because of the night Morgan had reached across the table to hand Sophia a pen, a completely ordinary pen. And their fingers had met for a moment, and neither of them had moved away. And the pen was there between them for 2 full seconds before Sophia took it and said thank you. And they both returned to what they'd been doing. And for the rest of that evening, Sophia had been aware of the exact distance between her hand and Morgan's hand, in a way that was not how she was usually aware of her surroundings. It didn't hold because of what Morgan had said about the apartment, about disappearing, about the point being this building. There was also the night Morgan came home late from some work event. It must have been nearly midnight, and knocked on Sophia's door still in the coat, still with her bag, and said only, "I saw something today that made me want to be here." And Sophia opened the door wider, and Morgan came in and sat on the couch for an hour without explaining further. And Sophia made tea and sat across from her, and that was the whole thing. That was it. But the way Morgan had said, "here," not home, not my apartment, just here, the specific word. Sophia had turned it over 100 times since. She thought about it all and made her tea, and stood in her kitchen, and arrived, slowly and without drama, at the thing she'd been circling. She was in love with her neighbor. She put that down in her thoughts the way you put something heavy down on a table, carefully with both hands, knowing that once it's there, it stays there. She wasn't going to do anything about it. That was the second thing she knew. Because she was 34, and she'd been here before in different forms, and she knew the difference between a feeling and a possible thing. Morgan's life was not this. Her life was 12 feet of hallway, a planter box, takeout containers and the recycling. Morgan's life was boards and profiles and the kind of work that asked for all of you, always. Sophia had seen it up close for 3 weeks at Thornfield. She knew what it cost. She knew that what happened in the evenings, in this building, in this particular quiet, it was real. But there was also the rest of it. The rest of Morgan's life, which was not this. She could feel it without acting on it. That was an option. It was even, probably, the right one. She decided this at midnight in her kitchen. She meant it. The next morning she was on the balcony, and Morgan came out and said, "I made extra coffee," and handed her a mug over the planter box, and Sophia took it and said, "Thank you," and their eyes met, and Sophia thought, "I meant it, I mean it, I mean it. She meant it." Morgan went back inside to take a call, and Sophia stood there in the cold with a mug of coffee that tasted exactly like the way Morgan made it, less sugar than Sophia would have used, a little stronger. And she made a quiet, private, absolute disaster of meaning it. The distance she'd promised herself lasted 9 days. 9 days of being slightly too busy, of not quite being on the balcony at the right time, of answering the Thursday knock at her door with, "I'm on a deadline, I'm sorry." Which was true. She was on a deadline. She just was also home and sitting on the floor, and her heart was doing something uncomfortable, and she could not, at that moment, be in the same room as Morgan Elliott. She sat on her floor and listened to Morgan's footsteps go back down the hallway. She sat there for a while. Then she got up and opened her laptop and wrote the best 800 words she'd produced all month in one clean, uninterrupted hour, which said something about the productive power of suppressed feelings and which she chose not to think about too hard. On the 9th day, she ran into Morgan at the mailboxes, and Morgan looked at her. Not badly, not with reproach, just with something steady and careful, and said, "Are you okay?" "Yes," Sophia said. "You don't have to be," Morgan said. "Just that." Sophia collected her mail. She stood in the elevator and held it together. She was not, she thought, as good at this as she'd hoped. It was 2 days after that, the second Friday of January, when she went to Morgan's door. She knocked. Morgan opened it, reading glasses pushed up on her head, the face of someone who'd been working for 6 hours and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. "I need to tell you something," Sophia said. Morgan waited. Sophia took a breath. "I can't do the thing where I pretend." She gestured between them, vaguely. "I'm not good at it. I've tried for 2 weeks and I'm not." She looked at the door frame. "I don't want to make this complicated. I know it is. I know your life is. I know there are about 15 reasons this is." She stopped, started again. "I'm just not good at pretending I don't feel what I feel. And I think you probably already know what I feel. And I think that's okay. I just needed to say it out loud once." She looked at Morgan. Morgan had gone very still. "You don't have to say anything," Sophia said. "I'm not asking for anything. I just—" She let out a breath that was half a laugh. "Couldn't keep walking past your door pretending." Morgan looked at her for a long moment. "I know," she said. 2 words. But the way she said them, not dismissal, not discomfort, not the careful management of someone being told something they didn't want, something in them that was the sound of a person who had been holding their breath for a long time. "I know," she said again. And then, "Sophia." Her name. Just her name. Sophia looked at her and thought, oh, this isn't one-sided. She had made herself consider the possibility that she was reading it wrong. That the warmth and the closeness and the looks that lasted a second too long were just Morgan being Morgan, the quality of her attention, the specific and unrepeatable way she engaged with whatever was in front of her. But the way she said her name, that wasn't nothing. But before we go any further, if you've made it here, if this story found something in you that you've been carrying quietly, something that didn't quite have a shape before tonight, hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it tells YouTube that stories like this one matter. That's how I get to keep making them for you. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe and ring the bell. That's the only way the platform will actually tell you when a new story goes up. Now I want to ask you something, and I mean it. Write it in the comments. Have you ever sat on the other side of a closed door knowing exactly what you felt and chosen not to knock? What kept you there? Tell me. I read every single one. And drop your city in the comments too. I mark everyone with a heart. Now. Back to Sophia. The weeks between January and February were the truest weeks of the whole story. That's how Sophia will think of them later, as the weeks that were most completely themselves, most completely real, before reality arrived in the form of a Tuesday morning and 2 honest sentences. Because what happened after the door confession was not a beginning. It was something more careful than that, and more mutual, and harder to name. They didn't suddenly become a thing. They became, instead, more fully what they'd been becoming since November, but without the pretending, without the 9 days of manufactured distance. without the careful avoidance of each other's eyes when a sentence landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to land. They were still just Sophia and Morgan in a hallway, still just coffee on the balcony, still evenings at the table, still the two of them on Sophia's couch watching a documentary about something they'd both been curious about. The specific, comfortable ease of two people learning how to be close to each other without the pretending in the way. But now Morgan would say her name in a way that wasn't nothing. Now Sophia would catch Morgan looking and not look away. Now there was, under the ordinary surface of it, the presence of what they knew about each other. It was a specific kind of happiness, quiet and anxious in equal measure. Sophia let herself have it. She told herself, just this. Just these weeks, whatever they are. She did not let herself look at what came next. She should have looked. She knew this later. She would have looked eventually. She was not someone who could maintain a willful blind spot indefinitely. It wasn't her nature. But the weeks were good, and she let herself be in them, and she did not look. The Tuesday morning in the hallway was not the turning point. It was the marker of one, a line drawn around something that had already changed. The turning point was 3 days before that, on a Saturday afternoon. Sophia had come back from the lakefront and found Morgan sitting in the hallway, just sitting there, outside her door, her back against the wall. This was not normal. Morgan did not sit in hallways. Morgan did not sit in hallways in her coat with her hands loosely in her lap and a look on her face that Sophia had never seen before. Not controlled, not careful, not the version of herself she usually wore in shared spaces. Morgan. Sophia crouched down in front of her. What happened? Morgan looked at her. There was a board meeting today. On a Saturday? Emergency session. She let out a breath. There's been a decision. One I've known about for a while. It was... She stopped, pressed her lips together. It was confirmed today. Sophia waited. I'm relocating, Morgan said. The New York office. The company needs full executive presence there. It's been under discussion since last spring. A pause. Since before I moved in here. The words arrived one at a time and arranged themselves in a way Sophia's brain processed before her chest did. The chest took a second longer. How long have you known? Sophia said. Since August. August. 2 months before October. 2 months before the move-in, before the furniture van, before the single chair at the dining table, before the mailbox and the broth and the balcony and the coffee in the mornings and the evenings that had kept coming, kept being real. You moved in knowing you were leaving, Sophia said. I moved in knowing I had a window. Morgan's voice was steady in the way it was steady when she was working hard to make it so. I moved in knowing I wanted... She stopped again. Looked at the wall across the hallway for a moment. I wanted the months to be real. Not a hotel. Not somewhere I was passing through. A beat. I wanted to be somewhere. And then there was your building. She looked at Sophia. There was you. Already there. Sophia sat down against the opposite wall. Their knees were nearly touching. When do you go? She said. 6 weeks. Sophia looked at her hands. Sophia. Morgan's voice was different now, quieter. I'm not going to tell you I'm sorry and have that be the thing I say to you, because it isn't enough, and it isn't quite right. She paused. I knew what I was doing when I moved in. I knew the window. I chose to take it anyway because... Her voice caught, very slightly, in a way that Sophia could count on one hand the number of times she'd heard it do that. Because I didn't want to not have this. Sophia looked at her. This, Morgan said, and she didn't gesture, didn't qualify it, just said the word. Sophia thought about the broth in November. She thought about the laugh that had escaped before Morgan could decide to let it out. She thought about her name, said in a way that wasn't nothing. Okay, she said. okay? You have 6 weeks. Sophia looked at her. Let's not waste them being sad about the 7th. Morgan looked at her for a long moment, and Sophia watched something settle in her face. Not peace exactly, but the particular quiet of a person who has expected worse and received better. Okay, Morgan said. They sat in the hallway for another 20 minutes. The radiator made its sound. Somewhere below them, the elevator complained at the 4th floor. Mrs. Kowalski from 7C walked past them with her grocery bags, looked down at the two of them on the floor, said, "Girls," in a tone that conveyed several things simultaneously, and kept walking. Sophia caught Morgan's eye. Morgan looked at her. They both pressed their lips together at the same moment, trying not to laugh. And then they both laughed anyway, together, in the hallway, on the floor, and it was the specific kind of laugh that comes when something is a little sad and a little absurd, and still, inexplicably, good. On the Tuesday morning, 3 days later, when Morgan was leaving for the elevator and Sophia opened her door and said the sentence, "You didn't buy that apartment because it was the only one available," it wasn't accusation. It was clarity. It was Sophia saying out loud, I knew. I've known for a while. And I'm saying it now because in 6 weeks you'll be gone and I need to have said all the true things at least once. Morgan's, I didn't was the same. It was confirmation. It was acknowledgement. It was, yes, this was real. It was real the whole time. The elevator closed. Sophia stood in the hallway and felt, underneath everything, a strange and painful gratitude for the fact that nothing had been wasted. Nothing unnamed. Nothing that would haunt her later as the thing she hadn't said. She had said it. Morgan had answered. That would have to be enough, and it almost was, and it wasn't, in the way of true things. The last night was a Wednesday. Morgan's movers were coming Thursday morning. The things she had accumulated over those months. The sparse, slowly filling apartment that had started with boxes and a single chair, and had acquired over 6 months a second chair and a plant she'd bought for the windowsill, and a throw pillow that had migrated from 7A and never made its way back, and the specific small geography of a place where someone had actually been, were getting packed up. The boxes, which had never quite disappeared, were going to complete their journey. Sophia had made dinner. She wasn't going to make a ceremony of it, or she had told herself she wasn't. And then she had made the pasta that she knew Morgan liked, and bought the wine that Morgan had brought the first time, and set her own table with the specific care of someone who is absolutely not making a ceremony of something. They ate, and they talked. Not about New York, not about Thursday. They talked about the book they'd been recommending back and forth for 2 months, and neither of them had finished. They talked about January, the good parts. They talked about Gerald, who had survived the winter with uncharacteristic ease, and who Morgan had begun, somewhere in the middle of all this, addressing directly when she came over, just walking past him, saying something brief and private, as if the two of them had an understanding, which Sophia had never told her to do, and which she had found, from the first time, completely disarming. After dinner, they sat on the couch. The city did what the city does. Neither of them tried to make it mean more than it was, which was the only way it could mean what it meant. I have something for you, Morgan said. She went to the kitchen, she'd brought a bag, and came back with a book. It was worn at the corners and had a particular quality of having been read multiple times by the same pair of hands. The specific book they'd talked about that Friday afternoon in the Thornfield kitchen, 6 months ago. The one that had turned up on both their radars. I've been meaning to give this to you for months, Morgan said. I kept reading it again first. Sophia took it. She felt the weight of it, the worn spine, the places where the pages had been turned more than once. Don't read the note tonight, Morgan said. Sophia looked up. Not tonight, Morgan said. Give it a few days. Sophia held the book. She thought about saying a lot of things. She said, You made the months real. You should know that. Whatever you wanted from this, that was it. That's what it was. Morgan looked at her for a long moment. She reached out and tucked a piece of Sophia's hair behind her ear, the way she had done once before in December, and which neither of them had mentioned. She left her hand there for a moment, against Sophia's jaw. Not much, just the weight of it, the warmth of it, a thing that didn't need to be anything more than what it was. Then she dropped it. She stood. She picked up her bag. She moved toward the door, and Sophia walked with her, and they stood together in the threshold of 7A, the way they had stood in hallways before. Two people who had learned how to occupy the same small space, who had figured out the specific distance that was close without being too much, and who now knew, both of them, that this was the last time they'd stand in it like this. Sophia, Morgan said. Her name. One last time, in that way. The way that was not nothing and had never been nothing. The way that held all the sentences she wasn't saying, because they both already knew them. The elevator was already open. She must have called it before dinner, thinking of the morning, thinking of Thursday. And Morgan stepped inside. Sophia stood in the doorway of 7A and did not move. The numbers above the elevator changed. 7, then 6. Then the long drop to L, to the lobby, and then gone. She stood in the hallway for a while. The building was quiet. Mrs. Kowalski's light was off. The radiator was doing the thing it did. The floor was cold through her socks. Then she went inside. She put the book on the kitchen table, Morgan's instructions sitting at the corner of her mind. Don't read the note tonight. She looked at it. She put her hands flat on the counter. She breathed. She didn't feel broken. She had expected to feel broken, had been quietly braced for the specific cracking sound she'd heard inside herself before, after things that ended. But this was different. This was not the sound of something breaking. This was the sound of something that had been whole, being carefully set down. She went to bed. In the morning, 7B was quiet in the specific way of an apartment where no one lived. She made her coffee. She went to the balcony. The planter box was still there. Gerald was still there. The piece of lake you could see was still there. The narrow strip of it, gray in the early light. She stood on her side and drank her coffee. She didn't move to Morgan's side. She didn't need to. She was just here, on her own half, in the cold, with the city, which was what she'd always had. It was enough, and it wasn't, and she was okay with both of those things being true at the same time. 3 weeks later, Sophia read the note. It was short. Morgan's handwriting, small, controlled, slightly slanted. You were the most real thing about those 6 months. Not the apartment, not the window. You. Thank you for not pretending you didn't see me. Not many people do. I hope you keep the balcony. I hope Gerald thrives. I hope you send the thing you've been afraid to send. You should. It's good. Sophia folded it, held it for a moment. Then she opened her laptop and sent the essay she'd been sitting on for 4 months. She wasn't sure if she sent it because of Morgan or because of herself. She was starting to understand that those two things weren't always different. That the people who see us clearly sometimes give us back to ourselves in ways that outlast their presence. She opened the balcony door. February had its usual opinions about this. She went out anyway. The city was going. The lake was there. Gerald on the railing was fine. Sophia Reyes was fine. Not the same fine she had been in October. The settled, intact, nothing-needing fine. A different one. A fine that had room in it now for something she hadn't had a name for before Morgan Elliott bought the apartment next door and said it was the only one available. She had the name for it now. It was called having been known. And it turned out that even after the person who knew you was gone, the knowing stayed. If this story reached something in you tonight, something that didn't have a name before you press play, write changed in the comments. I'll be there. I read every single one. And if you want to stay in this world a little longer, there's another story already waiting for you on the screen right now. A big hug. Until the next one. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description.